October 12, 1944. 4047 in the afternoon, a convoy of military trucks rolled through the gates of Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. Inside the canvas-covered beds, 83 Japanese women sat rigid and silent. They'd been captured in the Pacific Theater, held in temporary facilities in California, and now transported across a continent to a place they couldn't have found on a map. Through gaps in the canvas, they glimpsed endless forests turning gold and red with autumn. The air was cold. Everything smelled of pine and unfamiliar earth. The trucks lurched to a stop. Commands were shouted in English, sharp and incomprehensible. The women climbed down one by one, their legs stiff from 2 days of travel. They formed into lines without being told, muscle memory from their own military training. What they saw next made several of them catch their breath. Standing in formation along the perimeter fence were American soldiers. But not men. Women. Dozens of them in crisp olive uniforms, rifles slung over shoulders, faces stern and professional. The Japanese prisoners had never seen anything like it. In their culture, women didn't bear arms, didn't guard prisoners, didn't stand like sentries with that particular mix of authority and readiness. It felt like stepping into a world turned sideways. The woman at the front of the guard formation stepped forward. Captain Dorothy Chen, Chinese-American, 32 years old, born in San Francisco. She'd volunteered for the Women's Army Corps the moment they started accepting recruits. Now she commanded the first all-female guard unit in American military history. Her orders had been clear but vague. Guard them, keep them secure, figure out the rest as you go. She looked at the line of Japanese women standing before her. Most were young, early 20s. A few were older, perhaps nurses or civilian contractors caught in the wrong place when territory fell. They wore a mix of clothing, some still in tattered military issue, others in donated civilian clothes that didn't fit properly. Their faces showed exhaustion, fear, defiance, resignation. Everything you'd expect. What Captain Chen didn't expect was how they held themselves. Straight-backed, dignified, refusing to let captivity erase their sense of self. The first night was chaos barely contained. The prisoners were processed through intake, fingerprinted, photographed, assigned barracks. The wooden buildings were heated but sparse. Iron bunks lined the walls. Each woman received 2 blankets, a pillow, a tin cup. The guards established perimeter patrols, locked gates, checked windows. By midnight, Camp McCoy's women's section fell into uneasy silence. Private Sarah Kellerman stood watch on the east fence line, 23 years old, from a farming family in Iowa. She joined the WAC to escape the endless cycle of planting and harvest, to see something beyond cornfields and county fairs. Now she paced along a fence in Wisconsin, watching over women who 48 hours ago she'd thought of as the enemy. Abstract. Dangerous. Less than human in the way propaganda posters taught you to think. But standing there in the October cold, she could see them through the barracks windows. Some were crying quietly. Others sat on their bunks, staring at nothing. One woman near the window was braiding another's hair with slow, gentle movements. Private Kellerman had 2 sisters back home. She recognized that gesture. Comfort. Connection. The small kindnesses that make unbearable situations slightly more bearable. Something shifted in her chest. These weren't monsters. They were just women. Scared women far from home. The first week was a study in careful distance. The guards maintained strict protocols. Roll call at dawn. Meal distribution at precise intervals. Outdoor exercise in designated areas under constant supervision. The prisoners obeyed every instruction without resistance. No defiance, no escape attempts, no violence. They moved through the routines like ghosts, speaking only when necessary, their faces carefully neutral. But Captain Chen noticed things, the way they organized themselves internally, establishing their own hierarchy without being told. The older women looked after the younger ones, making sure everyone ate, everyone had adequate clothing as Wisconsin's autumn deepened toward winter. They kept their barracks spotlessly clean, far beyond military requirements. They created order in a situation designed to strip order away. One morning during inspection, Chen found origami cranes lined up on a windowsill. Dozens of them, folded from scraps of paper the women had somehow acquired. Red, white, blue, the colors of their captor's flag. A prisoner named Kimiko Tanaka had made them. 34 years old, a nurse who'd been stationed at a field hospital when American forces overran the position. She spoke limited English but communicated through gesture and her careful artwork. Chen picked up one of the cranes. The folds were perfect, crisp and precise. Kimiko watched her with dark, unreadable eyes. Chen turned the crane slowly in her hands, then carefully placed it back on the windowsill. She nodded once. Kimiko nodded back. No words. Just that small moment of acknowledgement. You see me. I see you. We are both human here. November brought snow. The Wisconsin winter arrived early and brutal. Temperatures plunged below freezing. The camp's heating system struggled to keep up. Guards and prisoners alike bundled in every layer they could find. Morning roll call became an ordeal of numb fingers and wind that cut through wool like it was gauze. The supply sergeant reported they were short on winter coats. Budget issues, bureaucratic delays, the usual military complications. Captain Chen requisitioned what she could. But it wasn't enough. 40 prisoners had adequate winter gear. 43 did not. The guards had their issued coats, regulation and warm. The math was simple and brutal. Chen called a meeting of her guard unit. 23 women crowded into the administration building, stamping snow from their boots. She explained the situation. 43 prisoners without proper coats. Winter just beginning. She didn't tell them what to do. She just laid out the facts and waited. Private Kellerman spoke first. I have an extra sweater in my locker. Heavy knit. My mom sent it. She paused. They can have it. Corporal Maria Rodriguez stood up. I got a coat from my last posting. Still good. I don't need two. One by one, the guards volunteered items. Sweaters, scarves, gloves, wool socks, things sent from home, extras from their own supplies, purchases made in town on their meager pay. Within an hour, they'd assembled 43 packages of winter clothing, not military issue, personal items, freely given. The distribution happened quietly, no ceremony, no speeches. Guards simply handed packages to prisoners who needed them. Some of the Japanese women stared at the clothes in confusion. One woman, tears streaming down her face, clutched a blue scarf and bowed deeply, repeatedly. Private Kellerman, who donated that scarf, felt her own throat tighten. She nodded awkwardly and walked away before emotion could show. That night, the dynamic shifted. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. But the prisoners began making eye contact with the guards, small nods of acknowledgement during roll call, quiet thank you attempts in broken English. The wall between captor and captive developed its first cracks. December 1944. A prisoner named Yuki Nakamura collapsed during outdoor exercise. She was 19, the youngest in the camp, and she'd been sick for days but hadn't reported it. Didn't want to be trouble. Didn't want special treatment. Private Kellerman was on duty when Yuki went down, her slight frame crumpling into the snow. Kellerman ran to her, dropped to her knees, checked for breathing. Yuki's skin burned with fever. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. Kellerman shouted for the medic, but didn't wait. She gathered Yuki into her arms, this enemy soldier barely out of girlhood, and carried her toward the infirmary. The girl weighed almost nothing. Kellerman could feel every rib through the donated sweater. In the infirmary, the camp doctor diagnosed severe pneumonia. Yuki needed antibiotics, fluids, round-the-clock care. The military hospital had limited space for prisoners, especially female prisoners who were considered low priority. Captain Chen made a decision that could have ended her career. Yuki would stay in the camp infirmary. The guards would take shifts watching her. They'd provide the care themselves. For 6 days, Yuki burned with fever. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking in Japanese, sometimes just moaning softly. The guards rotated through in 8-hour shifts. They gave her water, changed her sweat-soaked sheets, monitored her temperature. Private Kellerman volunteered for extra shifts. She'd sit beside Yuki's bed reading letters from home aloud, her voice a soothing backdrop even if the words meant nothing to the delirious girl. On the 7th day, Yuki's fever broke. She opened her eyes, clear and focused for the first time in a week. Private Kellerman was there, dozing in a chair beside the bed. Yuki whispered something in Japanese. Kellerman jerked awake, leaned forward. "You're okay," she said. "You're going to be okay." Yuki's hand moved weakly across the blanket. She touched Kellerman's sleeve, just her fingertips against the fabric. Her lips formed a word Kellerman had heard before, but never understood. "Arigato, thank you." Kellerman covered Yuki's hand with her own. "You're welcome," she said. "You're so welcome." When Yuki was strong enough to return to the barracks, something remarkable happened. The prisoners had been working on something in secret, pooling their meager resources. They presented Private Kellerman with a gift. A handkerchief embroidered with cherry blossoms. The stitching was exquisite, done by hand with thread carefully pulled from their own clothing. In one corner, tiny letters spelled out, "To our friend," with gratitude. Kellerman held that handkerchief and couldn't speak. Couldn't explain to these women what it meant. That she'd grown up, being taught they were savages. That every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every movie had told her Japanese were less than human. That she'd believed it, or tried to believe it, because the alternative was thinking too hard about what war really meant. Now she stood holding proof that propaganda was a lie. These women weren't savages. They were seamstresses, nurses, sisters, daughters. They were human in all the ways that mattered, and she'd helped one of them live. That changed everything. Christmas 1944. The camp faced a dilemma. Military regulations didn't account for this situation. Female guards, female prisoners, the strange liminal space they occupied between war and peace. Captain Chen received permission to organize a modest Christmas celebration for her guards. Nothing elaborate, just a meal slightly better than usual, maybe some music on the radio. But what about the prisoners? Their country didn't celebrate Christmas. They weren't entitled to special treatment. Yet they were human beings who'd been ripped from their lives and dumped in a frozen camp thousands of miles from home. Captain Chen thought about this for a long time. Then, she made another career-risking decision. Christmas Eve, the prisoners were brought to the mess hall. They entered cautiously, uncertain what this meant. The guards had decorated with paper snowflakes cut from requisition forms. Someone had acquired a small pine tree. It stood in the corner, hung with ornaments made from tin can lids and painted wood. Nothing fancy, but it glowed with effort and care. The meal was the same for everyone. Guards and prisoners sat at the same tables, ate the same food. Turkey, potatoes, gravy, bread. Not much, but more than rations. Captain Chen stood and gave a short speech. She didn't talk about war or duty or regulations. She talked about being far from home during the holidays, about missing the people you love, about small kindnesses that make hard times bearable. Then something unexpected happened. Kimiko Tanaka, the origami artist, stood up. She spoke in careful English, each word chosen precisely. "We are grateful. You show us kindness. In Japan we have saying, Ichigo Ichie. It means this moment, only this moment, never again. We share this moment. We remember." The room fell silent. Some guards cried openly. Some prisoners did too. They were enemies. The war still raged across the Pacific, brutal and unforgiving. But in this moment, in this shabby mess hall in Wisconsin, they were just women sharing a meal on Christmas Eve, acknowledging each other's humanity in a world designed to erase it. After dinner, one of the guards produced a harmonica. She played carols, simple melodies that filled the room. Some Japanese women hummed along to tunes they didn't know. Others listened with closed eyes, letting the music wash over them. When midnight came, they returned to their separate quarters, guards to their barracks, prisoners to theirs. But something fundamental had shifted. The fence still stood. The war still existed. But the hatred had begun to dissolve. January 1945. The war news was relentless. American forces advancing across the Pacific. Japanese cities bombed, casualties mounting on both sides. The prisoners listened to radio broadcasts they weren't supposed to hear, understood more English than they admitted. They knew their country was losing. They knew what that meant for them, for their families back home. One prisoner, Haruko Sato, received a Red Cross telegram. Her brother had been killed in action. She was 30 years old, a former schoolteacher. The guards found her sitting alone in the exercise yard, snow falling around her, the telegram clutched in her hands. She wasn't crying, just sitting, staring at nothing. Private Kellerman approached slowly. She didn't know what to say. What comfort could you offer an enemy whose brother you might have killed, or whose brother might have killed your brothers? The moral calculus was impossible. So Kellerman said nothing. She just sat down beside Haruko in the snow. They sat like that for 20 minutes, silent. The snow fell steadily, coating their shoulders, their hair. Finally, Haruko spoke. He was kind, my brother. Loved books, wanted to be teacher, like me. Her English was rough, but the meaning clear. Kellerman nodded. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." Haruko turned to look at her. "Your brothers, they fight?" Kellerman nodded. "Two of them. Marines. Somewhere in the Pacific." She didn't say what she was thinking. That Haruko's brother might have shot at Kellerman's brothers. That this war had tangled their lives together in grotesque ways. That neither of them had chosen this. "I hope," Haruko said carefully, "they live. Your brothers. I hope they go home." Something broke in Kellerman's chest. She reached out and took Haruko's hand. The gesture was against every regulation, every protocol. But in that moment, regulations didn't matter. Two women who should have been enemies, connected by grief and the desperate hope that somehow, someday, the killing would stop. February brought news that changed everything. American forces were closing in on Japan's home islands. The war's end was visible on the horizon, though how it would end remained unclear. Camp McCoy received new orders. The female prisoners would be transferred to a larger facility in California, consolidated with other POWs for eventual repatriation. Captain Chen called her guards together. They had 2 weeks to prepare. The prisoners would leave on March 1st. The guards would be reassigned to other duties. This strange, unprecedented experiment in female military supervision would end. Chen looked at the faces of her unit. These women had signed up to guard enemies. Instead, they'd learned to see human beings. "I want to be clear," Chen said. "What happened here was exceptional. We maintained security. We followed orders. but we also chose kindness when we could. That wasn't weakness. That was the hardest choice possible. She paused. You did something unprecedented. You proved women could serve in this capacity. But more than that, you proved enemies don't have to stay enemies. Remember that. The final 2 weeks passed too quickly. The prisoners knew they were leaving. They didn't know what awaited them in California, or when they'd see Japan again, or if their families had survived the war. They focused on small tasks, cleaning their barracks more thoroughly than necessary, organizing their few possessions, creating small gifts for the guards who'd shown them kindness. On the last night, the prisoners held a ceremony. They called it omotenashi, a Japanese concept that means wholehearted hospitality. Using scraps and materials they'd collected, they'd created gifts for every guard. Origami art, embroidered cloth, small carved figures made from firewood. Each gift was personal, specific to the guard who would receive it. Private Kellerman received a paper crane, larger than the others Kimiko had made. Inside the body, carefully folded, was a note in English. You showed me America has kind heart. I will never forget. Your friend, Kimiko. Kellerman held that crane and tried not to cry. Failed. Around her, other guards were similarly affected, clutching their gifts, embracing prisoners in ways that shattered every remaining barrier. Captain Chen received a collective gift, a handkerchief embroidered by all 83 prisoners. Each woman had added her name in tiny, precise stitching. In the center, a message to Captain Chen. You gave us dignity when we had lost everything. We honor you. Chen, who'd maintained professional distance throughout, broke down. She bowed deeply to the assembled prisoners, a gesture of respect they immediately returned. March 1st, 1945. Dawn. The trucks arrived. The prisoners gathered their few belongings, dressed in the donated winter clothes that had kept them alive. They formed into lines one last time, but the precision was gone. Now they clustered in small groups with the guards they'd come to know. Trading final words, making promises to write, though everyone knew how unlikely that was, holding on to these last moments before they were severed by duty and distance. Yuki Nakamura stood before Private Kellerman. The girl who'd nearly died, who'd been carried through snow to the infirmary, who'd recovered because someone cared if she lived. She was crying openly. Kellerman hugged her. Regulations be damned. Be safe, she whispered. Please be safe. The prisoners climbed into the trucks. The guards stood at attention, saluting, as the convoy rolled toward the gates. Just before the lead truck passed through, Kimiko Tanaka stood up in the back. She'd fashioned a paper crane from a scrap of her uniform. She held it up, high, where everyone could see. Then, she released it. The crane caught the wind, tumbled through the air, landed at Private Kellerman's feet. Kellerman picked it up. Inside, one word in English, Ichigo Ichie. This moment, only this moment, never again. The trucks disappeared down the road. The guards remained at attention until the sound of engines faded completely. Then, slowly, they broke formation. Some cried. Some stood in silence. All of them felt the weight of what they'd experienced. They'd been ordered to guard enemies. Instead, they discovered sisters. Camp McCoy's women's section was repurposed 2 weeks later. The barracks that had housed 83 Japanese women became storage facilities. The fence remained, rusting slowly. No official report documented what had happened there. Military records noted only that the experiment in female guard units had been successful from a security standpoint. Nothing about the kindness, nothing about the gifts exchanged, nothing about enemies who became friends. But the women remembered. In the decades after the war, some of them searched for each other. It took years. International relations were complicated. Japan and America danced around their shared history, neither quite ready to confront what they'd done to each other. In 1982, 37 years after that March morning, Private Sarah Kellerman, now Sarah Johansson, wife, mother, grandmother, received a letter from Japan. The return address meant nothing to her. She opened it carefully. Inside, a photograph. An elderly Japanese woman standing in a garden. Behind her, cherry trees in bloom. And on the back in careful English, "Dear Sarah, I am Kimiko, the origami maker. I never forgot you. I never forgot kindness and darkness. I am alive because you chose to see me. With eternal gratitude, your friend." Sarah sat at her kitchen table and wept. She dug through boxes in the attic until she found it. The paper crane from 1945, yellowed now, fragile, but still intact. She held it like the precious thing it was. Proof that even in war, even between enemies, human connection could survive. She wrote back. They exchanged letters for 15 years until Kimiko's death in 1997. In one letter, Kimiko wrote about that winter in Wisconsin. "I thought I would die there. Not from cold or hunger, from despair, from losing all hope that human beings could be good. But you and the others showed me goodness exists, even in impossible circumstances. You saved more than my body. You saved my faith and humanity." Other connections were made. Yuki Nakamura found Private Kellerman through a veterans organization in 1989. They spoke on the phone, both crying, struggling through language barriers and emotion. Yuki had become a nurse like she'd wanted. She'd married, had children, lived a full life. "Because you carried me," she said. "Because you cared if I lived. That changed everything for me." Captain Dorothy Chen never sought out the women she'd commanded or guarded, but in 1995, on the 50th anniversary of the war's end, she was invited to speak at a veterans conference. She stood before an audience of former soldiers and sailors and told them about Camp McCoy, about the choice her guards had made, about the human cost of viewing enemies as less than human. "We were taught to hate," she said. "Our propaganda was thorough. But hatred couldn't survive proximity. When you see someone's humanity, when you acknowledge their suffering, hatred becomes impossible. That's what my guards learned. That's what the prisoners taught us. We were all just women caught in a machine we didn't build. And for a few months, we chose to be human together." The audience sat in silence. When Chen finished, the applause was thunderous. But what she remembered most was later, when an elderly Japanese woman approached her. The woman bowed deeply. Chen recognized her. Haruko Sato, the schoolteacher who'd lost her brother. "Captain Chen," Haruko said in careful English. "I never thanked you. You let us keep our dignity. In war, that is everything." Chen bowed in return. "You taught us," she said. "You taught us that the enemy is just another name for someone we haven't learned to see yet." The story of Camp McCoy's female guards and prisoners remained largely unknown for decades. Military historians focused on combat, on strategy, on the big movements that shaped the war's outcome. The small kindnesses exchanged in a Wisconsin camp seemed insignificant by comparison. But the women knew differently. They carried those months with them for the rest of their lives. It changed how they raised their children, how they viewed conflict, how they talked about enemies and war and the possibility of peace. They'd learned something crucial: that choosing kindness doesn't make you weak, that seeing your enemy's humanity doesn't mean you failed your duty, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to hate. In 2003, a group of former guards and former prisoners organized a reunion. They were elderly now, many in their 80s. They gathered at a hotel in San Francisco, these women who'd been separated by war and brought together by circumstance. Some hadn't seen each other in 58 years. Some had never met at all, arriving at the camp at different times. They spent 3 days together, sharing memories, comparing experiences, crying and laughing and marveling at the strange paths their lives had taken. One evening, Kimiko's daughter presented the group with a gift. Her mother had died 6 years earlier, but she'd left instructions. The daughter carefully unwrapped a frame. Inside, a paper crane. The original, from 1945, the one Kimiko had released from the truck. Sarah Johansson had sent it back to Kimiko in 1982. Kimiko had kept it for 15 years. Now it returned to the guards as a symbol of everything they'd shared. My mother said. The daughter read from a letter that this crane represents hope. When she folded it in that camp, she had no hope. But the American women gave it back to her. They showed her that even in the darkest times, humans can choose light. She wanted you to have this crane so you remember. You made a difference. You changed lives. You proved that war doesn't have to destroy what makes us human. The women stood in a circle, passing the frame between them. Each one touched the crane gently, reverently. This tiny piece of paper folded 60 years ago by a prisoner who'd found kindness in captivity. It had survived decades, crossed oceans, outlasted empires, because what it represented was stronger than war. That's the story no one tells. The one that doesn't fit the narrative of heroes and villains, of good guys and bad guys, of clear moral lines. War is complicated. Humans are complicated. And sometimes, in the space between enemy and friend, something extraordinary emerges. Camp McCoy's women's section taught us that. A group of American guards and Japanese prisoners who were supposed to hate each other, who had every reason to hate each other, who chose, instead, to see each other, to offer small kindnesses, to acknowledge shared humanity even when everything around them said that humanity didn't matter. They weren't naive. They knew the war continued. They knew terrible things were happening across the Pacific. They knew their countries were locked in a struggle that would end with nuclear fire and hundreds of thousands dead. But they also knew something else, that they could only control their own choices, and they chose kindness. That's the legacy of Camp McCoy, not in official records or military histories, but in the lives of women who learned that the enemy is never as simple as propaganda claims, in the letters exchanged across decades, in the reunions held 60 years later, in the paper crane that survived because it represented something too precious to lose. We need that story now more than ever. When the world feels divided into camps, when we're taught to hate people we've never met, when enemy becomes a word we throw around carelessly. Camp McCoy reminds us that proximity destroys hatred, that seeing someone's humanity changes everything, that even in impossible circumstances, we can choose to be kind. The last survivor of Camp McCoy's guard unit, Maria Rodriguez, died in 2019 at age 97. She'd kept a journal from those months in Wisconsin. Her family donated it to the National Archives. In one entry from February 1945, she wrote, "Tomorrow the prisoners leave. I should be glad. That's what a good soldier would feel. But I'm heartbroken. These women were never our enemies. They were just women trapped by circumstances beyond their control, same as us. We shared a winter together. We learned each other's stories. We became friends, despite everything trying to keep us apart. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll ever see them again. But I know this. The world tried to make us hate each other. We refused. That matters. That has to matter. It did matter, Maria. It still does. 75 years later, when we need reminders that choosing kindness is possible, that seeing our enemies as human is not weakness, but strength, that even in the darkest times connection can survive, your story matters. The fence at Camp McCoy came down decades ago. The buildings were repurposed, torn down, replaced. No physical trace remains of what happened there. But the truth persists, in the memories of those who lived it, in the letters exchanged across oceans, in the paper crane that represented hope when hope seemed impossible. 83 Japanese women and 23 American guards proved something crucial. That war doesn't have to destroy our humanity. That enemies are just people we haven't learned to see yet. That kindness, even in small measures, even in impossible circumstances, can change the world. That winter in Wisconsin, they created something unprecedented. Not a military victory or strategic breakthrough, something more fundamental. They created sisterhood behind barbed wire. They chose to be human together when everything told them to be enemies apart, and in choosing that, they won something more important than any battle. They won their own humanity back. They refused to let war make them into something less than they were. They showed that even in the machinery of conflict, individual humans can make different choices. That's the story of Camp McCoy. Not about heroes or villains, about women who were thrown together by war and chose connection over hatred, about guards who gave their winter coats to prisoners, about prisoners who embroidered handkerchiefs for their captors, about small kindnesses that echoed across decades. It's a story that reminds us, even now, that we always have a choice. We can accept the hatred we're taught, or we can choose to see. We can treat enemies as less than human, or we can acknowledge their suffering. We can follow orders mechanically, or we can find small ways to be kind. Camp McCoy chose kindness, and that choice reverberated through time, touching lives, changing perspectives, proving that even in war's darkest moments, human connection can survive. Ichigo Ichii. This moment, only this moment, never again. But the impact of those moments lasts forever. That's what they learned behind the barbed wire. That's what they taught the world. That's the revolution that happened when women guarded women and chose to see each other as human. It wasn't recorded in military histories. It didn't change the war's outcome. But it changed the women who lived it. And through them, it changed how we understand what's possible when we refuse to hate. That's the real story. The one worth remembering. The one that matters most.